Well, I would be inclined to say good morning, but that doesn't seem appropriate this morning. Though we are still gathering information, it is clear that last night our city experienced incredible tragedy, one fueled by senseless violence. In the blink of an eye, 4 young lives have been lost, victims of a cycle of pain and hopelessness that has become all too common in our city and other urban areas across the country. As Indianapolis begins today with a prayerful mourning for the families of these victims and, frankly, for our public safety community, let me be clear. We can never allow ourselves to become numb to the scourge of gun violence and the toll that it is taking on whole generations of young people. This is not acceptable. This is not who we are as a city. This isn't who we are as neighbors, as brothers, as sisters, as fathers, as mothers. This is not normal. And like so many in Indianapolis, I am heartbroken to have IMPD stand once more and give a briefing on a violent night. But I also want to be clear about something else. We can and we will turn this sadness and reflection into a community call to action. Action. Nothing said by any of us or anyone outside this room does anything to help our young people unless it leads to action. Because despite millions of dollars in taxpayer investments, in policing, and in neighborhood anti-violence initiatives in recent years, time and time again, we are confronted with the ripple effects created by a proliferation of guns, drugs, and poverty in our neighborhoods. Local government has created committees, commissions, and funded studies. We've heard from subject matter experts and adopted best practices. We've hired hundreds of new officers. We've equipped our department with new technology, bolstered witness protection, and doubled funding for anti-violence groups. We face a challenge that traces its path across generations and through neighborhoods. But at its core, it's never going to be solved by government alone. And it certainly will not be solved by politics. What we are confronted with is a question of who we are as a people. What we are confronted with are broken hearts and lost souls. After years of plans and appropriations, it is clear the work to mend those wounds will take place in classrooms, in church basements, in community centers, as much as it will inside the walls of the city-county building. There are no opponents over this issue. We all want this solved, especially the families of the young people who fear violence daily. And I share their frustrations. I share their anger of so many this morning. But I remain confident that our path toward peace will require open hearts, not clenched fists. Let us resolve that these mindless acts are unconscionable but not unstoppable. Let us come together as one city to pursue the changes in hearts, minds, and policies that will make our community safer for all of the residents of Indianapolis. Chief.
So last night, as the mayor said, we experienced a tragedy. We are heartbroken for the families and for the community. The men and women of the IMPD are responsible for the safety of the citizens of this city, and we take that very seriously. The tragedy we saw last night, it doesn't make any sense, but we're focused on holding accountable the person or persons that is responsible for this. But we can't do this alone. We've talked about it before. We're going to need help. So for those in the community that may have information, we would ask that you consider calling Crime Stoppers, our homicide office, talk to the beat officer if you're so inclined, reach out to Shauna Major's team, and we can also provide the witness assistance program if you feel you need that kind of help. There's answers out there. There's people who know. Our detectives are dedicated to finding the people responsible for this, and I know they'll work hard. We will have community engagement and other community resources out in that area to help out where we can today. My prayers are certainly with that family. You know, the sad thing about this is I'll be at the viewing whenever those are held, or the funerals. I'd much rather have gotten to know these young people while they're still alive. I'm sure I'll hear great stories about them from their family and realize what wonderful people they probably were. Our hearts are with that family. Our hearts are with the community. For an update on the investigation, I will turn it over to Deputy Chief Craig McCarthy.
Good morning, and thanks for being here. And I hate that we're here to talk more about more senseless violence and death. Before I get started with a summary, obviously, I just want to also recognize that there are 4 families who are grieving and mourning the loss of 4 lives that were taken way too early by, again, this senseless, pointless violence, and our thoughts and prayers are certainly with them. So I will start with a brief summary of what we have so far. Please bear in mind there's a lot of information that I'm not going to be able to provide to you yet. We're very early in the investigation, so things will continue to change, things will continue to develop, and we will keep you updated on that. But at this point, I may not have a whole lot beyond my update that I'm able to give to you. Last night at 10:26 p.m., IMPD East District officers were dispatched to 4157 Shady Oak Drive. They were dispatched on a run stating that the back patio door of this residence was shattered, possibly shot out, and that some subjects were seen fleeing from that residence. Officers arrived at 10:29, and they found the 4 victims down inside the apartment, and they were pronounced deceased on the scene. Homicide detectives responded, began canvassing the area. They talked to witnesses, summoned crime lab to the scene, and they have been working throughout the night. In fact, when I came down here, I believe they were still just finishing processing the scene, but they continued to process that scene through the night. The victims were determined to be 3 males and 1 female, all aged 19 to 21. We can tell you that we do not believe that this was a random incident. We believe that this was definitely a target incident. We know this happened in an apartment complex, so we know that, I mean, in the apartment complexes, everyone is living in a close proximity to one another. So we know that there are lots of people who saw, heard bits and pieces of what happened out there last night, and certainly we need to hear from them. As you've already heard the mayor and the chief both say that this is a community issue, and we need the community's involvement to help take care of this. And so if there's anyone who saw or heard anything during this time frame last night, we ask that they call. We ask that they call the homicide office at 327-3475. And of course, Crime Stoppers is always available at 262-TIPS. Even if the information that you have or what you saw or heard, if you feel that might be insignificant, please, we still ask that you report it, because all pieces of the puzzle are important, even though in and of, by itself that fact might seem unimportant, but as a piece of the bigger picture, sometimes that's the piece of information that we need. So that we ask that you please contact us. At this point, I think I will just open it up for questions.
Mr. Mayor, when you look at what Indianapolis is going through right now, we're, by my last count, 24 murders. It's only February 7th. Why should the public expect anything different than what's been in the past? I mean, look at our homicide rate. Last night, an effort to create crime commission shot down along partisan lines. Why should the public have any confidence of anything that's being said this morning?
Well, because it's up to all of us. We need to work together as one city and one community to eradicate this senseless, mindless violence that affects too many of our neighborhoods. Let me defer to the president or the public safety chair on this regard. I would like to comment as it relates, Abdul, to your reference to last night's debate over the Violence Study Committee. After hours of debate last night, after all of the heartfelt testimony from community members and impassioned advocacy, and yes, politics, that entire controversy comes down to one thing: whether criminal justice policy is discussed before a committee or whether it's debated before a commission. Think about that for a minute. Committee, commission, planning council, board, bureau, panel, agency. The idea that if we only had one more bureaucratic entity studying violence, then our problems would be solved. That is ludicrous. Let me say in 30 seconds what a study commission would take 30 weeks to tell us all. Systemic poverty is creating a school-to-prison pipeline for generation after generation of our young people. An opioid epidemic and a mental health crisis have added gasoline to that fire. Too many illegal guns are awash on our streets. Our juvenile justice system is antiquated. These things taken together are what's driving violence on our streets. We know this. The community knows this. Our focus has been and will continue to be on action. Not words, not committees, not commissions, but action. And that's exactly what I plan to dedicate my energies toward in the coming days and weeks ahead. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mayor. Leroy Robinson. I think we appreciate law enforcement, appreciate the chief, appreciate the first responders from last night. I think it's unfortunate that we've been on the path of speaking about policy and commissions and committees and bureaus, like the mayor said, at a time like this, as the chair of the committee and the president of the City County Council. our hearts and minds are with the families and the 4 young souls that were lost last night. I don't think this is a time to be talking about policy issues and talking about politics. I think it's important that we focus on those 4 young lives and wrap our arms around those families that were lost and over on the east side. So thank you so much.
We've had multiple press conferences, press statements about what we've been doing, and some of the changes that we're gonna enact, more local beat policing, some of those crime prevention dollars, but what substantial changes are we gonna make to improve our numbers? Or are we just gonna keep doing what we've been doing? I mean, is there some significant, we keep talking about.
No, I mean, I think we live in a time where people want instant gratification on things. We live in a social media world where it's instant comments on whatever we're doing. We can't be detracted from the things that we think are going to work, that we're going to keep focused on and keep trying to do. The community, the council, the mayor are going to focus on the things, those long-term things that we know are going to impact crime in the future.
What are
The mayor mentioned those. Those are addressing poverty, and lack of access to quality education, jobs, treating trauma, dealing with mental health issues, all those things that are long-term. Your law enforcement officers are going to continue to focus on the small group of people who are trigger pullers, the people that we know are committing the violence in the city. Those are the people that we know, right? I mean, we cannot be in everyone's house. We can't be on every street corner. We don't have a crystal ball that says this is where the next crime is going to occur. Crime has changed, and violent crime has changed in my 21 years. When we used to have Gang A versus Gang B, we know exactly who we needed to go after to stop the violence. We saw that in Butler-Tarkington when I was the commander of North District. We knew we had a gang there, we knew we had a gang up north, and we had to impact them in order to stop the violence. It's the random nature of what we're seeing now makes it more difficult for law enforcement. It doesn't mean we're going to revert back to old tactics where we cast out this large net and hope to find a violent criminal or a person that's committing violence. We're going to stay surgical and laser focused on the people, places, and behaviors, small number of people, places, and behaviors that are contributing to the violence. We're not going to get pulled back into the old ways of doing things at the risk of harming our legitimacy and relationship with the community that we've worked far too hard to try to build up over the last few years.
So we spent millions of dollars, hundreds more police officers. As you said, Mr. Mayor, records investment in our public safety infrastructure. No offense, but there are a lot of people alone and like, what the hell's going on around here? We spent all this money, hired all these officers, spent all this crime prevention grant money. At the end of the day, it seems all we have to show for it is more dead people, particularly African Americans, who have been 70% of the murdered victims in Indianapolis since January 1.
Abdul, I can see your frustration. We're all frustrated too. I mean, I walked into the apartment last night. I saw those 4 young people laying there on the carpet. Do you not think that bothers us? Yeah, it bothers us. Everyone up here is disappointed in that. I can't make personal decisions for people when they pull out a gun and pull the trigger. Something has changed in our society that allows people that thinks that that's the way to solve the problems. That can't be impacted by law enforcement necessarily. I can't police the heart. The investments in law, we're 400 square miles and we have 1,683 cops. 400 square miles. The city of Boston's what, 45, and they have 2,000 cops, right? Police officers aren't the answer to this. We have been putting handcuffs on and throwing people in jail for hundreds of years, and yet we still have crime. That's not the answer. Now, there are people that have to go to jail, and we're going to put them in jail. But we also, as a community, have to look in the mirror and address the issues that led us here, acknowledge the past, and then try to prevent it from happening in the future. That's what we all should be focused on. It doesn't mean that the dollars that have been invested have been wasted. They absolutely have not been wasted. But it's more than dollars, and it's more than handcuffs.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the antiquated juvenile justice system, sir. Officers have expressed frustration that when they do deal with a juvenile, they take them to the juvenile center, the juvenile is released with no consequences or no services. What is the city trying to do to address that issue? It seems to be that if you try to root out the issue at an early age, the young folks that are getting in trouble are not getting the services or the help that they need. They're being released back right into that bad environment. What are you doing about that? What's the city council looking at to address that issue?
Well, I'd answer that, Raphael, by saying that we are reviewing a comprehensive juvenile justice reform. There's more to come in that regard from a formal perspective. But to reiterate what our assistant chief said, the investments that we have made, Abdul, in public safety, I think are important, and we will remain resolved to continue those investments. But to reiterate Chris Bailey's observation, they can't police hearts, and we need a change in opportunity for young people. That's why I'm so proud of the summer jobs program that we have for young people, the investments that we make in Indy Achieves, the investments that the city administration is attempting to make to change the trajectory of the lives of our young people so that we don't see situations like the one that we saw last night, so that young people are encouraged to make good choices and good decisions with hope and opportunity, not the lack of hope and opportunity, which all too often lead to this mindless menace of violence that plagues too many of our cities, our communities.
For Councilman
This will be the
Robinson,
last question.
for Councilman Robinson, in the last 12 hours, what new idea, observation, or approach have you come up with that is going to fuel the study and the upcoming work of your committee?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm not quite sure if you heard my response earlier. But as the Chair of Public Safety and Criminal Justice, our focus is not on what policies we're going to create. I put out a press release last night that talked about our next steps. But today, myself, President Osley, members of our council are focused on the 4 young lives that were lost last night, and not today talking about policy and politics. It's about those young lives, those victims, and their families. And also, what the mayor said, we're going to talk about more of the root cause, the wraparound services that we're going to provide from the city. Today is not about politics, not about policy, not about commissions. It's about the 4 young lives and their families and their victims that were lost last night.
I'm not asking about
Thank you.
politics, I'm asking what new idea you've come up with or new approach that we struck out on before.
And give us an idea of what the initial investigation has come out with. What happened in that apartment? Were the victims at all associated with the people who killed them? Was there any apparent motive for what happened?
We will not be taking any further questions.
Oh, come on, we've been
After
here.
yours.
I think it's probably too early, really, to speculate on much of that. Like I said, we don't believe that this was a random event, so I think that the scene tends to show that that they were familiar with one another. The victims and suspects probably were familiar with one another. As far as a motive, at this point, we're not sure. We have some ideas, we have some theories. I will say that robbery is one of those potential theories, but we haven't solidified that by any means. So it's, like I said, still very early in the investigation. More information will be forthcoming as we learn these things, but that's where we're at right now.
Have the families all been notified already, Deputy Chief?
I don't believe they have, no.